Hey, listen!
Welcome everyone, this is AndresRestart, and this time we're talking about this DLC situation for Tears of the Kingdom. Now, I didn't plan on making a dedicated DLC video for Tears of the Kingdom quite yet because, well, we still don't know that much about the actual main game, so I was kind of waiting on talking about this subject for a little bit later, and there will probably be a bigger video on this DLC subject later down the road when we have more information. But for now, we got something going on with Tears of the Kingdom where people feel that DLC has already been confirmed. So let's take a look at what people are talking about here. So on the Tears of the Kingdom website, when you take a look at the bottom, there are a few different points of information, 4 different asterisks, and the second one says, full version of game required to use DLC for that game, sold separately. So, without context, when you read this, you may think, oh, well, there's no need to say you need the full version of a game to buy the DLC unless there's DLC to buy. Yes, that is straight up referring to paid DLC. However, it may not be the paid DLC you're thinking of. A lot of people are jumping to conclusions and saying that this means paid DLC for Tears of the Kingdom. But let's take a look at what this asterisk is referring to. So higher up in the page, there's this section for the digital edition, and it says, buy the digital version and download it directly to your Nintendo Switch system, no code required, plus earn My Nintendo Gold points you can use toward more games and DLC. Notice that there is an asterisk next to My Nintendo Gold points, and there's 2 asterisks next to the DLC. So, the asterisk for the My Nintendo Gold points is explained at the bottom that you can get Nintendo Gold points for buying digital games, and that gives you a little bit of extra money to buy stuff. And you can use those gold points to buy games and DLC on the eShop, and that's what those asterisks are for. When it says you need the full game to buy DLC, that means just DLC you can buy on the eShop in general. In other words, not necessarily for Tears of the Kingdom, but games like Splatoon, Xenoblade, the previous Zelda game Breath of the Wild, games where you are required to buy the full game in order to enjoy the DLC. Before someone mentions it in the comments, yes, I know you can buy Torna separately, but in general, you need to buy most games in order to enjoy the DLC. Anyways, that's what this is referring to. This DLC mention has nothing to do with DLC specifically for Tears of the Kingdom. That said, do I think there will be paid DLC for Tears of the Kingdom? And the short answer is yes. But I do think an argument can be made that because Tears of the Kingdom is a direct sequel to Breath of the Wild, and they are spending so much extra time on this game to get in as much content as possible, as we assume, and with it likely being the last game in this part of the timeline with this art style and these characters, I can see a scenario where this game comes out, it's content complete, there's nothing more to add, there's nothing more to go beyond this, and that's it. Nothing else. I think that is possible. However, when we just think about games we've gone from Nintendo, internal Nintendo projects, first-party games, they usually have DLC. Fire Emblem Engage, Expansion Pass. Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, Expansion Pass. Splatoon 3, Expansion Pass. Xenoblade Chronicles 3, Expansion Pass. And by the way, all these games are follow-ups to games that already came out on the Switch that also had paid DLC. And by the way, Breath of the Wild had paid DLC, just like all those other games too. So, if you're asking what I think is most likely, paid DLC. There are some exceptions, take a look at Super Mario Odyssey for example, but that is the exception, and it still had some free DLC updates that were pretty fun, just no paid DLC expansion pass with a new adventure in there. So I do expect there to be paid DLC. That is the norm. That all said, we're not sure when they're going to announce this DLC, and we're not sure what this DLC is going to entail, and I do think it's a little nuanced. Let me explain why. If I were to assume this would be a similar situation to say Splatoon or Xenoblade, then I would assume, okay, they're probably going to have a game dedicated direct about a month before release, and in there they will announce some level of DLC plans. That's how they handled both Xenoblade and Splatoon. They were dedicated directs for those games about 4 to 5 weeks before the release, and in those directs they made mention of an expansion pass or DLC coming later down the road. So that would definitely be my first guess. However, if you've been paying attention to the channel, recently I've been arguing that if we are getting a Tears of the Kingdom Direct, I think there might be a chance we see a Zelda Tears of the Kingdom Direct actually a little earlier than a month before its release. So a month before its release, 4 to 5 weeks, that would put it around early April. Well, I think it might happen sooner, and the reason why is basically because there is a decent chance that we see a playable demo for Tears of the Kingdom at PAX, which is at the end of March, and I have a hard time believing Nintendo will give us a playable demo without giving us more actual details about the game, like actually talking to us about the game at some length within a direct beforehand. Now, maybe it's just an overview trailer, but something like that I feel has a decent chance of happening before PAX, which is at the end of this month. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see a Tears of the Kingdom Direct about 2 to 3 weeks from now. And if that happens, well, maybe we see the DLC announced there, but it would be happening a little bit earlier. But there's another wrinkle to this conversation, and that has to do with Nintendo moving on to the next generation. Now, I'm not saying that your Switch will be invalidated if Nintendo announces a new system for this year or next year. The Switch will still be relevant for years to come. Just look at how Nintendo handled the 3DS. There were still new games coming up for a 3DS a few years into the Switch's life cycle, and the Switch itself is likely to be more cross-compatible with their next system, so the Switch is going to be around and relevant for years. However, we are late into Switch's life cycle. It is likely something is coming around the road, and there's a lot of different reports and pieces of information suggesting something could be happening soon. We just covered a leak for the Scarlet and Violet DLC that includes mention of a graphical update for the final wave of its DLC for a new Nintendo Switch system, implying a more powerful Switch at the end of this year around the winter time. And the reason this is relevant is because the same way how they may be planning a graphical enhancement patch for Scarlet and Violet's last part of its DLC, Nintendo may handle it somewhat similar to Tears of the Kingdom. And I've made some mention to this in the past. With Tears of the Kingdom having such a long development cycle, Breath of the Wild came out in 2017. Tears of the Kingdom is coming out 6 years and 2 months later. It's a long gap, the longest gap between major Zeldas ever. How much longer is the next gap going to be? Could they possibly cut that down? I would hope, but the trend has been bigger and bigger gaps as we go on. And since it doesn't seem like there's a new system coming out within the next 2 months, they're not going to have a big Zelda to push their next system. So how will they handle things? They need a Zelda game to be relevant on the next system, and there are likely going to be a great deal of years before that next Zelda. So long that we may already be talking about the Switch 3 at that point. So, one way to handle that is to hype up your DLC for Tears of the Kingdom and match that with the launch window for the next system. There still could be DLC that will be made available for Switch owners, not saying it won't be, but they'll have an improved version perhaps visually, performance-wise, on the new system for Tears of the Kingdom that will be done via some sort of patch that will release alongside an expansion quest to Tears of the Kingdom. And let me focus a little bit on this idea of an expansion quest. So, think something like maybe Miles Morales for PS5, or some of the bigger quests we've seen for other bigger adventure games like Horizon, for example, or even like the Xenoblade series, where their expansion quests or DLC quests are basically entire other games. Something like this could happen for Tears of the Kingdom. It would just be a fraction, but with how big Tears of the Kingdom is, even a fraction of that would be a significant little adventure to enjoy afterwards. And Nintendo may want something like that alongside a graphics enhancement patch, maybe a Game of the Year edition they release alongside the next system, or at least within the launch window, to hype that system up, and have a version that sells throughout that system's lifecycle and helps to push it the same way they had Breath of the Wild come out early in the Switch's lifecycle, day one, and it pushed that system. Now, I'm not saying that this Tears of the Kingdom DLC will be like the launch title for the next system. I think at this point, it's more likely to be Mario, so maybe Mario and Zelda are switching spots here. But something like that is kind of how I think they're going to handle things. And even if the rumor/leak is wrong about the Switch 2 coming out this winter at the end of the year or early next year, there are still reports suggesting that Nintendo's going through manufacturing plannings and such, and it still seems likely that it's going to happen at some point in 2024. So push up the DLC release dates a little bit, or maybe that doesn't even really matter because we're not talking about this coming out this holiday, but sometime within the next year and a half. I can see Nintendo taking their time with pushing out the DLC for Tears of the Kingdom, especially if they want this content to be something that helps to bridge the gap between Tears of the Kingdom and the next Zelda. They may take longer than 9 months for this DLC. They may push it to a year and a half. And maybe they have smaller updates throughout. They keep Tears of the Kingdom relevant for a longer amount of time, or as long as they possibly can. Now, what would this DLC expansion quest be? I don't know, maybe they just have a big brand new island just come out of the ocean, Atlantis style, and there you go, there's a whole other area to explore in the world of Hyrule in Tears of the Kingdom way later after its release. But we'll wait to have a more dedicated analysis and theory video on that when we actually have legitimate details about the main game in Tears of the Kingdom. But those are my thoughts on this DLC situation so far. What do you guys think? Let me know in the comments below. Anyways, everyone, this is AndresRestart. Thank you so much for listening and watching, and I'll see you all really soon. Take care. Bye.